Thank you so much to the Nuclear Age Peace Foundation, to David, to Rick, to everybody for coming out tonight. When I first got the call from David, he mentioned all the people who have given this lecture, some names like Daniel Ellsberg, Noam Chomsky, Helen Caldecott, Mairead McGuire. There was a part of me that really paused and kind of thought, really? You want me to come and give this lecture? So I know it's like big shoes to fill. And I don't have the wisdom that they do to impart, but I told David, I hope I make it up with the passion and hope, which is, I think, what this world needs more than ever. So before I start, and it's so amazing, I think I've watched that video I don't know, a million times. I think it's really great because I think it shows so much of the complexity. It's not just the 1.2 million landmines. It's not the most fortified border in the world, but there's just so much that has been filled in 70 years of this unresolved war. And I think especially as women trying to do this work, the deep patriarchy and just being used by all sides when we are in the service of peace. So anyway, I don't know, it was just such a head trip to go and watch that film again, but I think it just shows you how complex this conflict is. But I don't know if everybody was watching on the world stage what was happening, but 2 days ago, North and South Korea met for the first time in North Korea in 11 years. The two leaders of North and South Korea, Kim Jong-un met with a team of 5 high-level officials from South Korea, and these are the 6 things that they agreed to. One was to hold a 3rd North and South Summit at Panmunjom. That's where the armistice was signed. That's where the 2 soldiers face off at each other. They're going to meet in April. The second is they've reestablished the military-to-military hotline to ease tensions. It's huge. Number 3, North Korea made clear its willingness to denuclearize the Korean Peninsula if military threats against it are resolved and if the security of its system, its sovereignty, is guaranteed. Kim Jong-un also made clear that there was no reason for North Korea to possess nuclear weapons if those security guarantees were in place. Number 4, North Korea expressed a willingness to have candid talks with the United States to discuss both denuclearization and the normalization of U.S.-North Korean relations. Number 5, North Korea agreed to freeze its nuclear and missile weapons testing as long as the talks would resume. They also confirmed that they had no intention of using nuclear weapons or conventional weapons against South Korea. And number 6, to continue the positive momentum initiated by the Olympics, they agreed to invite a taekwondo team and artists to Pyongyang. While this news is incredibly heartening, the wild card is the Trump administration and how it will respond. What happens in the coming weeks will determine the prospects of a nuclear war or the peaceful resolution and the eventual reunification of Korea. As we all know, tensions reached a boiling point last year. North Korea conducted its 6th nuclear test, and it tested its Hwasong-15, the longest long-range missile, the furthest ever. Analysts say that it has the capacity to reach the US mainland. We witnessed President Trump's unabashed threats to unleash fire and fury on North Korea like the world has never seen, including threatening genocide on 25 million people of North Korea at the United Nations the world's forum for peace, diplomacy, and international cooperation. These verbal threats and on Twitter were backed by the massive movement of military armaments towards the Korean Peninsula, including the docking of 3 nuclear aircraft carriers in Korean waters. According to the US Congressional Research Service, if there were a conflict in the opening days of war on North Korea, 300,000 people would be killed. And that's just using conventional weapons. If nuclear weapons were used, and we know North Korea possesses at least an arsenal of 25 million people would be killed or injured. The Pentagon estimates that any military action to secure North Korean nuclear sites would require a ground invasion to find all the buried and hidden nuclear weapons, and that would require at least 600,000 ground troops, like soldiers. Do we even have that many in the US military? Everyone and everything would be impacted. Nuclear winter would set in and destroy everything: food, water, our oceans, the economy, and of course, human life. Where I live in Hawaii, the government began monthly sirens. So every month they do this, and then they add another minute. That's like about an incoming missile coming from North Korea. And we saw what happened in January with human error. I mean, there's so much room for mistake that could lead us down a path to irreversible nuclear war. I mean, this is what we're up against. So as for what direction the US will go in the cast of chaos, here's a few things that we know. Number one, the Trump administration has no diplomatic capacity. They have failed to appoint an ambassador to South Korea. The one that they were allegedly going to appoint, Victor Cha, a renowned hawk and neocon, his appointment couldn't be confirmed. He was basically axed because he opposed their bloody nose strategy of a preemptive strike. Yeah, Victor Cha, his nomination was axed. The State Department's most senior expert on North Korea, Joseph Yoon, he resigned last week because he was, quote, fed up with the Trump administration, and they're vacillating about whether they were willing to negotiate. There has been this internal battle taking place in the White House. On one side, you have Secretary of Defense James Mattis and Rex Tillerson, and on the other side, you have H.R. McMaster, the National Security Advisor, who is advocating for this quote-unquote preventive war before North Korea has the capacity to strike the US with a nuclear warhead. So there are rumors now that McMaster is going to be fired. On the one hand, so here are the 2 nominees, potentially. John Bolton. Do we know who John Bolton is? Yeah, he was the former ambassador to the UN under George W. Bush. He is the one that was responsible for undoing the 1994 agreed framework that was negotiated by Bill Clinton the last time we were this close to war. North Korea froze its nuclear weapons program, and John Bolton is the one that basically undid it. He, in a recent speech, called for massive military strikes. Quote, the US would have to simultaneously destroy all known North Korean nuclear and ballistic missile sites, submarine bases, artillery, mortar, and missile installments along the North's border with South Korea, end quote. So this is what Trump means when he says that if the US maximum pressure campaign that really is about further strangulating North Korea with more economic sanctions and forcing other countries to cut off diplomatic ties with Pyongyang, the US would move to phase 2, and that's what they mean. We know that massive armaments and B-2 bombers have already been moved to strategic locations in Guam, in Okinawa, in South Korea in preparation for military action. The New York Times reported last week that the Pentagon staged a quote-unquote classified military exercise I wonder, is this in violation of the truce of how, quote, American troops would mobilize and strike if ordered into a potential war on the Korean Peninsula, even as diplomatic overtures were taking place between North and South Korea? So that's John Bolton on one hand. And on the other hand is a guy named Stephen Biegun, who is the vice president of international governmental affairs at Ford Motor Company. He used to serve on the National Security Council under Condoleezza Rice during the Bush administration. So one thing that's interesting is that this is being played out similarly to what happened during the George Bush administration. There was Condoleezza Rice and Chris Hill on one side, and you had Dick Cheney and John Bolton on the other. The same thing is taking place again. I mean, I find myself kind of in a state of horror when I think, my God, the heroes in this cast of villains is Rex Tillerson, the former CEO of Exxon, and James Mattis, Mad Dog Mattis. I mean, but this is what we're facing. This is the reality of US policy on North Korea. So if Biegun is the candidate, and he is being backed by James Mattis, then talks with North Korea are on the horizon. According to the Nation journalist Tim Shorak, he attended a meeting last week. So Moon Jae-in, who's the president of South Korea, has a special envoy named Moon Chung-in, and he usually comes to Washington, D.C. during tense times. He floats ideas. And so he shared that at that meeting in the Olympics, during the Olympics, when Kim Yong-chol, who's the number 2 in North Korea, met with Moon Jae-in, that Moon Jae-in really conveyed to the North Korean leader that, quote, that they need to make progress on denuclearization because, quote, it's time for maximum prudence. It's like walking on ice. This is the South Korean president telling this to the North Korean leader about how serious the U.S. is to conducting a preemptive strike. And so Kim Yong-chol, allegedly, he really listened. And usually they said that they usually just brushed it aside. So I think that everybody is on high alert. So it was unimaginable. I mean, honestly, I wake up and I read the Twitter feed to see what the hell is going on. Because every day you never know, is there going to be a war? Is there going to be a conflict on the Korean Peninsula? So just 2 months ago, who would have imagined that the 2 Koreas would be marching together carrying a one Korea flag in the opening ceremony of the Olympics? Who watched that? Yeah, who didn't cry watching that? I mean, was it the most moving thing to witness the people that have been divided by war marching together? It was unbelievable to see Kim Yo-jong, the sister of Kim Jong-un, shake hands with Moon Jae-in. I mean, she's the first member of the Kim family to cross the border into South Korean soil since the Korean War. As you can imagine, it deeply touched the hearts of the Korean people. It touched the 34,000 people in that stadium. And everybody around the world cheered for Korea. But of course, the pundits were just quick to say, oh, this is Pyongyang's charm offensive. You know, Pyongyang is driving a wedge between the ironclad US-ROK alliance. But when the Trump administration threatens to totally destroy North Korea with a bloody no strategy, which will lead to a counter-retaliation on the 80 bases and 30,000 US troops in South Korea, if there were ever an incentive for the 2 Koreas to talk, it is now, right? I mean, who is driving the wedge? So as the 2 Korean leaders, they took this bold and magnanimous step to put aside their differences to prevent a new Korean war by working together to diffuse tensions. What happened in that moment of unity? Mike Pence, what did he do? He gave the stink eye. He refused to stand. And who else refused to stand in that box? Shinzo Abe, the Prime Minister of Japan. So for those who understand the tragic history of Korea in the last century, seeing the leaders from the US and Japan disrespect Korean efforts towards reconciliation was such an affront in so many ways. In 1905, Count Katsura and then War Secretary Taft signed a secret Taft-Katsura agreement where the US and Japan agreed to not interfere in each other's imperial conquests. Japan would look away as the US colonized Hawaii and the Philippines. And US would look away as Japan invaded Korea. So from 1910 to 1945, Japan colonized Korea and instituted some of the harshest policies that sought to erase Korean language and culture. My late parents were born and raised in that period. They would recall the indignity they suffered, including not being able to speak Korean in public, having to replace their Korean names with Japanese ones, and the deep poverty they experienced growing up as nearly everything their parents made and grew was seized by the Japanese colonial occupiers. In 1945, as Japan was defeated in World War II, after the US dropped nuclear bombs and destroyed instantly, killed instantly 250,000 people in Nagasaki and Hiroshima, my parents joined millions of Koreans as they poured out into the streets, celebrating Korean independence. Instead, they were treated as colonial subjects of Japan, people incapable of determining their own destiny. Rather than help liberate Korea, the United States divided Korea and installed a military government. So how did this happen? 2 young State Department officers named Charles Bonesteel and Dean Rusk, they tore a page from the National Geographic. They didn't consult any Koreans. They knew very little about Korea. And they drew a line across the 38th parallel. Truman sent a memo to Stalin to say the Soviets can take north of the 38th parallel and Pyongyang, and the US will take south and Seoul. The 2 halves of Korea were militarily occupied, and in 1948, 70 years ago, separate elections were held, creating the Democratic People's Republic of Korea in the north and the Republic of Korea in the south. That's how Korea was divided. In 2004, as I prepared for my first trip to North Korea, my mother lay on her deathbed as she struggled with cancer. I had been probably like all of you. What were we doing in 2004? We were preventing a US invasion of Iraq, right? 2002, 2003. And like other Korean Americans, we feared that North Korea would be next. I mean, North Korea was on the axis of evil. Iran, Iraq, North Korea. But here I was in this like personal struggle. My mother was dying of cancer. And it was also an opportunity to go to North Korea, to kind of see from my own eyes, North Korea, to see another part of my ancestry. And I really like struggled with this. And it was my mother who said, you should go. You should go to North Korea. You should meet the people of North Korea. You should see for your own eyes. So I decided to go. And as we had to go, we had to prepare all these songs, because Koreans love singing. And so we were practice singing Arirang. Arirang, ah. This is the song that Koreans sang, when my mother was growing up, before Korea was divided. We practiced singing the 우리의 서원은 통, the song that movements in both North and South Korea. It's called Our Hope for Reunification. So we practiced singing these songs together, and as we did it, she quietly told me that Kim Il-sung, the grandfather of Kim Jong-un, the founder of North Korea, had fought for Korean independence during Japanese colonial occupation. That is such an extraordinary admission for a woman who only had a 6th grade education. She bore 13 children and raised 10. She grew up during Japanese colonial occupation, lived through the division, lived through the Korean War, lived through US-backed dictatorship in South Korea. And so you can imagine all the anti-North Korean propaganda she grew up with. And even she said, he fought for Korean independence. He wasn't really a bad man, you should go. And I just thought, oh my God, what else do I not know about North Korea? So months before my mother passed, I went to North Korea. And I saw for my own eyes. I met the people of North Korea. And I just couldn't turn my back. I have been devoting my life to achieving peace on the Korean Peninsula since that moment. It's because I have a deep sense of responsibility as a US citizen to correct the unjust history of US involvement on the Korean Peninsula and to ensure that my country, the United States, supports the peaceful reunification of Korea instead of standing between it, or even worse, totally destroying the Korean Peninsula. So as the winds of peace blow across the DMZ and across the peninsula, there are extraordinary interests seeking to derail this peace process. We are truly in a historic moment, and what happens in the next few weeks and months will very much determine the future of peace or the future of war on the Korean Peninsula. And as much as I want to say it rests with the Korean people, I cannot. It depends a lot on the US government and what we can do as people in a democracy to sway our government. While we cannot obviously influence the chaos unfolding in the White House, I think we have the power to change the direction of this country's military and foreign policy. So here's what I think we need to do. 5 things. They are bold, they are audacious, but it can be done. Number 1, we have to first urge our members of Congress. I don't know who the congressional representative is from Santa Barbara, but we must urge that congressional representative to support the no unconstitutional first strike on North Korea. It's a piece of legislation. Right now, the version Senate Bill 2047 now has 9 co-sponsors. Dianne Feinstein is one of the co-sponsors. I think that says a lot, that we can move a lot of the other Democrats. There's a grave misperception that North Korea is a threat to the United States and to the world. I think it's only a threat if the US conducts a first strike. North Korea is not suicidal. The former chief of the US Pacific Command, Admiral Dennis Blair, told the Senate just a few weeks ago, quote, "North Korea is only an imminent threat if we make it an imminent threat. We've been talking these guys up a lot more than they deserve." And I where I live in Hawaii, I went to a talk a few months ago, and somebody said, the Pacific Command says there's a 0.01% chance that North Korea would conduct a first strike. I think that's an easy thing for members of Congress to get behind. Number 2, North Korea has agreed to freeze its nuclear and missile testing. We need to urge the US to reciprocate and agree to halt the war drills during the negotiations. The Olympics gave cover to Moon Jae-in to request that the US honor the Olympics truce, and so the US did. They haven't done the war drills, which happen every year. Do we know? I mean, we often see in the media, just like North Korea's missile test. Do we ever hear about the provocative war drills that the US and South Korea conduct annually, which is the largest in the world, involving tens of thousands of troops, B-2 bombers and fighter jets, simulating, rehearsing the invasion of North Korea? It includes in the operational plan, decapitation strikes. Well, if you were North Korea and you witnessed what happened to Libya, that did agree to give up its nuclear weapons, or Iraq, that didn't have it. They have their own history to look back at, where the US conducted indiscriminate bombing that destroyed 80% of North Korean cities. I mean, when I traveled to North Korea, I remember with our minders saying, oh, look at that one building. And I would say, that's really interesting. Like, we would come by, there's that building again. And I asked them, what is the significance of that building? And they said, oh, that's the only building that survived the air bombing campaign. I mean, you have journalists that went to Korea during the Korean War, and they said it was like walking around the moon. The only thing standing were chimneys. Like, it was just eviscerated by the US air bombing campaign. Number 3, we must oppose the Trump administration's maximum pressure campaign. So like I was saying, this maximum pressure basically has a few elements. One is obviously this provocative, aggressive military posturing, but it also includes more and more sanctions against North Korea. It includes forcing other countries to cut off diplomatic ties with Pyongyang. So here we are, we have, and you know, the US has succeeded in getting other countries and the UN Security Council to have more and more stringent sanctions on North Korea. So we're presented, and I think it's because we're so freaked out by the Trump administration. I think other countries are so terrified by the provocativeness of the Trump administration that we're being kind of presented with two options. One is this bloody nose strike that could kill up to 25 million people, or the quote-unquote diplomatic approach, which is this maximum pressure campaign, as if that is going to bring North Korea to talks, as if having more sanctions that target the civilian population, that target women and children, that target aspects of their economy like textiles. Who works in these textile factories, do you think? Women. How is that going to foment an uprising in North Korea or squeeze the regime? I mean, it's just impacting people. And in fact, UNICEF released a report in January, and they said that 60,000 North Korean children could starve as a result of these sanctions. Right? When I was at the UN a few weeks ago, a UN official who accompanied Jeff Feltman, the Undersecretary General, to North Korea in December, he said that one of the UN humanitarian aid workers told him that at least how many children would die a day? Because 1 child per day will die because of these sanctions. So I just think we need to call BS. This is not a diplomatic approach. Sanctions is another form of violence. We know in the lead up to the US invasion of Iraq how many children, according to the Lancet, were killed because of the sanctions. 500,000 Iraqi children. This is violence being waged against innocent North Koreans, and we have a responsibility as a global community to push back. Number 4, we must mobilize a grassroots movement for a peace treaty. And I just loved Rick's opening. I want him to travel with me everywhere we go, because you're absolutely right. I really believe that we need to see a peace treaty to end the war with North Korea. Trump's shameless and dangerous threats present an opportunity to mobilize the anti-war and the peace movement. I mean, honestly, I have been working on this issue for so long, and I have rarely been able to see the kind of mobilization that we have been seeing. This crisis does present an opportunity. But the real time factor is the South Korean president, Moon Jae-in. He was elected last year because there was a candlelight revolution that overthrew the daughter of the dictator, Park Geun-hye. He came with a mandate to engage with North Korea, to find a peaceful solution for the Korean Peninsula. And he has said he is pledging to see a peace treaty during his term. His term ends in 2022. We have to move. We have to move. We don't have this kind of alignment. Rarely do we. And it's going to be the people that's going to have to move it. We are not going to see any courageous member of Congress. There is not the political will. But we have the political will. And so I think what we need to do is pass city council resolutions all around the country. And we've already started to see them. Kauai, on the Big Island, Maui has just introduced one. I gave a talk in Albany a few weeks ago. They're starting to draft a resolution. I think this is going to take a grassroots movement. So I hope that you will join us in trying to get Santa Barbara to be one of the first cities on the US mainland to actually call for a peaceful and diplomatic resolution to the Korean War with the peace treaty. As the racist Senator Lindsey Graham has said, that is just a war over there, and it doesn't matter if millions of people will die. It is our war, and the American people have a responsibility to end it. We cannot wait for Washington to negotiate it. I hope you will seriously take this up as a community of peace-loving people that have the awareness about the underlying conflict between the US and North Korea. And lastly, this is for the women in the audience, which is at least half of you. In this moment of the Me Too movement and the women's marches, we must push for women's voices in shaping foreign policy. We know that when women's peace movements are involved in any peace process, we have now evidence of 3 decades. In 40 of the cases that were studied, 39 led to a peace agreement when women were involved. And when women are involved in helping to draft it, it's more durable. It lasted for over 15 years in those cases. We have to lead this country away from the militarized national security towards genuine security, genuine human security, ecological security. We must dare to be bold and audacious to demand what might seem impossible. Women's peace movements have the power to transform fear, vulnerability, and cynicism, I believe, into bold visions that advance a just, sustainable, and peaceful world. So I'm going to end with a quote from this Uruguayan novelist, Carolina de Roberts. She wrote a book called Radical Hope, and it's like a compilation of essays written by writers from all around the US about this moment that we're in under the Trump administration. And she says, "There is great danger in these times, and yet all is not lost. The future remains unwritten, but ours to shape, though it will not be easy. But I have faith. I have faith in humanity. I have faith in the power of women. I have faith in all of you, in the peace movement. I have faith in our democracy, but we must act." So thank you very much for listening to my long speech tonight. And I just want to end with a short little video. We just made it, and I just thought, oh my God, it's so good, because it really captures the moment. And so it's 4 minutes, and then I'll come back up to answer questions. So thank you very much.